Hello, it's Joey, and in this week's video we're having fun making clusters. We're using up our scraps and making embellishments like this. I'm sharing lots of design ideas and details today, so it's not just the process. I want to inspire your creativity and help you play with your own supplies. I'm making clusters in different styles with an easy, repeatable process, like this one using fabric or with words from a dictionary page, so many different ways. We're making up some embellishments, that's envelopes, pockets and tags, and I'm combining texture and colour so they really coordinate. And if you like the sound of this and you love playing with paper, then hit the subscribe button below and the notification bell. I've got some really exciting projects to come. I have all of my supplies laid out here to make clusters like this, and I want to talk you through each of these little piles so that it can be really easy for you to make these too. These little pieces of paper are just the offcuts from various prior projects. So this is a piece of vintage paper from a digi from Tracie, but you can see I've got all sorts of different patterns and colours, and they really are just the ends of pieces from cutting up paper, cutting up to make envelopes and pockets. They'll be layered behind a focal point. A couple of pieces we'll be using each time, and I'm going to glue them onto a banner you can see here, and that's what sits in this second little plate here. So I've made up lots of different size banners. They don't need to be all one size, and this collection really is just the slightly stronger pieces of paper or cardstock, or indeed in this case I've used a piece of relatively strong felt, just something different, and I fancied just adding a border to it, so I've been playing with some new toys, some new supplies. This is a fabric pen in green, but really the point is to get yourself prepared. It's a bit like decorating your house. To make a cluster like this, we want to have all of our little piles of goodies in front of us to play with. I'll need a backing for each cluster, so I have here a pile of rectangular pieces of cardstock, again in all sorts of different papers and card patterns, textures. What you want is a good selection, because we're going to marry up some of the colours and patterns in the focal points and think about how they go with and really enhance the cluster that goes on top. So get your supplies and your odds and ends and cut a whole batch of rectangular and square pieces. These butterflies are just one of the focal points, the extra embellishments you can add, and I think some of you know that I really like to play with flowers, so I make painty papers, I scribble on them, and I sit in an evening and cut out 5-petal flowers like this, and they're great for adding layers and texture, and indeed offering a place to use some unloved and wanted items sometimes. So these little sequins, these I buy in a local pound shop. You can see that they come in a rather large bag, and when would I ever get through all of these? So maybe before we spend any more money on more goodies, we can just see what we have in our stash and can use in a cluster. And that's what I was thinking about when I was playing with pieces of fabric like this. I really wanted to bring texture in, so I've been playing with an old curtain and making up grungy little squares to combine in a cluster. So I thought I'd just share how I go about making this. This is the ungrungified material, and you can see the difference in colour between the relative white and the greener shades that I've achieved there, and I got that by just playing with some little fabric paints. These are 3D fabric paints, not really meant for dyeing in general, more for making pictures, but hey, let's use our supplies however we want. So all I've done is pick a few different colours and add the colour, mix it in by just folding the curtain and playing around, and then adding a bit of water and indeed some acrylic paint. And I ended up with some stiffened material, which is great. I'd cut little squares like this, and it works superbly behind the cluster, and you can make them in different colours too. This one you can see is a more rusty red. I'm using a couple of glues today, so a high tack glue and one for wood. I might use a bit of glitter glue, and I'm going to have a go with a very narrow washi. But let's get going, let's put a cluster together. I start with a banner and I'm picking out a couple of those pieces of rectangular paper. And in terms of design and patterns, I'm just choosing some muted colours, not thinking too much about what might go and what might not go. I'm taking one of those little pieces of paper and just shaving off a corner. So with quite a steep angle and a good pair of scissors, I'm creating some interest, some level of detail. And it's one of the features that makes the cluster just a little bit interesting. I'm now layering up those little pieces of paper, but not directly on top of each other, just to the right here you can see. So placing each of the two pieces on top of each other but to the right means that we extend the size of our cluster, even though we've been using teeny tiny pieces of paper, and we're also getting a deeper and larger space, so something bigger to add to an envelope or a tag. And with those three pieces done, I'm going to layer in some fabric. So choosing one of those green grungy pieces of dyed curtain fabric, I'm going to position that behind, and I think I want a bit more height on this cluster, so I will have it more vertically than horizontally. Adding that with some relatively strong glue, and quite happy to see that half cut flower just peeping out behind, so I'm giving plenty of space for the fabric to be visible at the top. So positioning is quite important. Again, it's one of the details that I would think about as I go through. Don't spend too long thinking about it, have fun, keep up the pace, that's part of it, but maybe just make the most of all of these lovely pieces of paper and fabric supplies as you go through. It's time to choose a little backing card, so I'm sifting through my pile and choosing one that is complementary to the colours that I already have, not too dominating, and will allow some of the features like the fabric, like the embellishment that will go on the top, to really shout out. So the point of the backing card is to give it some robustness, so it's partly about structure, but it's also about not competing too much with the front of your cluster. You want those lovely patterns and contrasting papers to be things that catch your eye and not be too dominated by maybe a dark pattern behind. So I've chosen a square, and I've just made it a bit more interesting with a zigzag edge with some scissors I have in my collection. I'm pulling out flowers to sit on the front, and if you want to make these, I have a really easy video that you can look at to make 5-petal flowers, no template required. I'm going to add a bit of texture by, well, simply making them look a bit tatty, so using my knuckle to press in the middle, and again thinking about positioning. So the flower is going to go just a little bit to the left. I tend to prefer not to have things in the middle. I'm keeping the text horizontal, and I've chosen a size of flower that will just overlap some of the joins of those papers. So the magic and the mess sits behind the flower, and you have these lovely bursts of paper coming out from behind the flower petals, layering up again. So it's all about surprise, so that your eye has got some detail to look at. The layers of paper are just either 5-petal flowers or sometimes just circles I cut out of scraps of paper, and I'm doing a fairly decent job here, I think, of scrunching them up and making them look a bit tatty. I've chosen muted colours again, so that it's something of a family of patterns together, but also lots of contrast, so different patterns and colours do work. To finish off the flower, I think it benefits greatly from a focal point of some kind right in the middle. So I'm using some of my darker brown and bronze sequins, but you could paint, you could use a pen, a bit of glitter glue, anything you have in your stash. And it really is as easy as that to make a fun cluster. Let's make another, and let's make it with one of my best money saving tips I can possibly offer. So here's a banner in lovely dark purple with some gold embellishment, some gold pattern, and as we did before, I'm just pulling out some little pieces of paper, not taking too long. Maybe something in a family of shades will do. So I'm gluing them together just as I did before, layering up to get some more width and height. And you can of course make the banner face in the opposite direction like this. For some reason I just like to have the V on the left, and I don't know why that is. Can anybody explain that? Do you have a preference for which side your banner goes? When I make those banners, if I have a strip of cardstock, I fold them in half and cut the V out. And to begin with, that's a faster way of doing it because you get 2 banners made for the price of 1 fold and 1 set of cutting. What it also does is leave me with a tiny piece of cardstock in the middle, like that. So you can see where that came from. What I like to do when I have quite a dominant colour in the banner is make the centre of the flower, as we decorated before with the sequin, out of the remainder. So that bit is allowed to be thrown away. How frugal is that? So we'll layer up a flower. Again, I've used an old dictionary page that I've cut the flower from, and I'm trimming down from one of the circles I already have. That's a really nice piece of textured gold paper. I don't want to throw away little pieces like that. I love using them up. Do you have a stash or a pile of odds and ends of paper and cardstock? And what do you do with them at the moment? Do you use them up? Do you throw them away? Maybe you could make clusters. Let me know in a comment down below. I'm giving that gold piece a really good scrunch, and I chose that piece of paper because there is gold in the purple banner behind. I've cut it down to a size that allows me to see a goodly proportion of the petals in the 5-petal flower, but there's still plenty of space to add that little purple centre, and I'm even putting a last sequin or 2 on top of that. Don't worry about the glue, I know you can see it, but that will dry completely clear. So here we have the basis of a second cluster, and I quite like the colours in this one. There's something quite calm and peaceful about it. Time to add some backing, and I've also been playing with text. So you can see on this one that I've used some offcuts from, well, this is a child's dictionary, a brilliant way of getting definition and text into a project, but perhaps with font that's slightly larger, and I do like that as a design feature. So I'm positioning that behind the cluster that we've already made and thinking about how much of the text and which of the words I want to display. So again, it's going to help add robustness, but I'm also adding a design detail. And I think I'm positioning it here so that I can see a couple of lines above, nothing below. That's okay, it doesn't have to be even. I can see a little bit of white peeping out on the right as well. And here I am choosing some cardstock from our little supply pile. The purple was attractive because it went with the family of purple and the calm hues, but I'm not so sure that I want to have more of the same. I like the pattern in this one, and I'm just thinking that this one will work well, but I need some irregularity. I need something different, not just a plain rectangle. So I've cut a jagged edge on the right hand side, only on one end, and I feel that that gives some balance to the V of the banner, which is on the left. So we've got interest on the right in the form of that edge, and also the point on the lower piece of paper that we cut. We've got text at the top, we've got a focal point of a flower, and the point of the V of the banner. So a couple of clusters. I hope that gave you some ideas. Let's have some fun adding this decoration to envelopes, tags and pockets. Let's have some more playtime. I'm going to make 3 types of embellishment using these clusters. The first is a tag, and I've simply added some vintage book pages onto cardstock, and I've trimmed the corners with 2 cm diagonals. So I go 2 cm across the top, measure 2 cm down, and that seems to give me, for a 6.5 cm width tag, the right shape and enough size for positioning the cluster, a bit like this. In this example, I've been playing with metallic acrylic paints, having a lot of fun with 2 colours on each tag. These are the paints I've used. You can see I've got some bronze and green on one of the tags and some more vibrant pink and dark grey on another. And surprisingly, these combinations of two colours splotted onto tags just seems to allow us to create embellishments that are really fun to use. They go together. I used them when I put together the envelope folder that I made a few weeks ago. So these are perfect for either adding to a junk journal or maybe adding onto a page of a journal spread or in a pocket folder or envelope folder. And here I'm using some less traditional pairings of colours. I've got some dark grey and pink on the right and a bronze and pink on the left. And I've picked out a cluster that I've made that has a cheeky bit of painty paper just peeping out behind. And it's that I think speaks to the pink or the cerise in the metallic paint that I've splotted onto the tag. If you are inspired to make these and feel like adding them to a junk journal, then check out my video how to decorate a junk journal. I share lots of ideas for making a journal that's really personal for a friend. Maybe you want to make one as a gift. Here I've added a cluster to the front of a sloping pocket, and you can see that I've chosen colours that go with the plants and flowers in the book page behind. So let's just have a go at picking out one of the clusters from the collection that I've made and adding to the front of this two-tier sloping pocket. I've picked out a cluster that works well in terms of colour, so the purples and greens all go with the patterns in the book page behind, and I'm rounding the corner to make that also fit, but I like the fact that the butterfly is pointing slightly to the left, and that's in contrast to the opening of the pocket which comes from the right. So even with detail like that, you can add some more interest, just vary it up. The next example I wanted to share is how to decorate a couple of handmade envelopes. This one I made with some vintage papers. I was playing with a different set of colours from ones that I normally use. I added a little extra closure here, and it's a fold-up envelope. I watched a video by Angela Kerr. I don't have some of the materials she has, so I'm going to have to adapt that to suit what I have. This one is less traditional, so not vintage, more modern colours. And I've also been putting colour on the front of some of these envelopes too. So anything goes. I think a little bit of colour to layer behind a cluster is great. And it maybe helps you pick the particular cluster that you want to use, like this one here. I've got text by way of washi on the front of this cluster, which I really like. And I've chosen this one because it fits with some of that metallic yellow on the front of the envelope. So I'm positioning that to the right. I quite like that, but I can still see some of the green peeping out below. I feel that's just a little bit more fun than a plain envelope. What do you think? But let's have a go with an envelope that hasn't been coloured. Here's a cluster I've chosen. It's a little bit larger, so it takes up a little bit more of the real estate of the envelope behind. And although I like what it does to the front of the envelope, I want to add something that takes up more of the vertical space and takes the eye upwards. So I'm adding just a few pieces of that very narrow washi. If you've enjoyed this video making clusters and adding them to the front of tags, pockets and envelopes, then hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and check out my video on making a junk journal, because if you love paper and making things with it, I really think you'd enjoy that too. I hope to see you soon.